Right, so hey everyone and welcome back to another budget photography video. Now in this video I want to talk to you guys about long exposures. So what is a long exposure? Well, a long exposure is basically where you have your shutter on your camera open for an extended period of time, letting lots and lots and lots of light in. Now there is an inherent problem with that because of how bright it can be outside. So how do you get outside long exposures when it's really bright out? Well, there are two different ways you can do it. Now, one of the ways that you can do it is the most popular way, and that is to buy an ND filter, a neutral density filter. And what that does is that cuts out about 90% of the light, if not maybe more. I mean, look at that. This is a 16 stop ND filter, by the way. But what if you don't have an ND filter set like I do here, up to 16 stops? Now yes, ND filters are getting cheaper and cheaper, but what if you just forgot them? Well, there is another way you could do it. Why don't we go out and find out how? So the trick for getting long exposures without an ND filter is one thing. In a way, I think it's called photo stacking, where you take about 2 or 3 photos and you overexpose one and underexpose the other. So why don't we go and do that on my camera? So here's my camera. Let's just switch it all on. At the moment it's in full auto, so let's switch that to manual mode. I've got 1/5 of a second, f22, and my ISO is on low. Now 1/5 is a ridiculously low shutter speed, hence the tripod and of course a remote that I haven't got plugged in. So let's just plug that in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a overexposed image. So let's just do that now. There we go. So as you can see, if I push play, that is clearly overexposing on the sky, but the lake here is quite exposed. Okay, that can be sorted out in editing. Now I'm going to go to change my settings. Let's zoom in, and I can, you know what, let's go into live view so I can get a bit more of an accurate representation of what I'm going to be getting. Let's bring that aperture down to an we'll go to an f8, and again I'm using 1/500. I'm shooting low, quality raw, 1/500. That should be the right settings. Let's have a look. So there we go. So that's now overexposed, underexposed for the sky. So now that we've got both images, the under and the overexposed image, we need to take it into Photoshop and sort it out from there. So I'll hand you over to Alex from the future because I've not recorded it yet. So hey Alex. So this is where the work really kind of, you know, kicks in, and where that you've got to actually edit the pictures that you've got. So I've got them all here. Now I have got more than one here, just purely because I ended up taking, well, I took more than I should have. Now I have got one that I kind of played around with, that's not very good, but it isn't too bad. You can kind of see the difference, but as I say, it's not really the best because we don't have an ND. It is better to have, you know, a ND filter. I completely forgot what they were called just then, because you have to have a shorter exposure time than if you were to not use one. So it is still better to use a ND filter. So this picture here is the one that I'm going to use for the water. And then I'm probably going to use this sky, because the other ones that I've got are either way too blown out like that. Maybe I'll use that one, or they're just looking like that, and that's just, you know, I can do some correction in Lightroom, but there's only obviously so much that I can do. Anyway, let's go along to Photoshop Mix. These are the two apps that I'm going to be using today. Photoshop Mix and Photoshop Fix. Now, I could probably do this in normal Photoshop, but I'm still getting used to the app. It's a completely brand new app for me on the iPad, because I've recently updated a load of different stuff and I'm just not used to it on here. Anyway, let's get into this. So, I didn't want that. So let's go into Photoshop Mix, where we can mix both of the images. So here's one that I was again messing around with, and this is the one where I was messing around with that really, really dark sky, and it just looks, you know, horrible. I mean, ugh, what the hell is even that? So let's just, you know, let's get rid of that. And we'll start a new project. And we'll have the sky from that one. And then we'll add another layer. Excuse me. And for exposure for the lake, I think we'll have this one here. So now that we have both of our images, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to cutout, and I'm going to cut out this here, and just, you know, carefully try and get rid of as much as I can on the overexposed one, and, you know, just kind of bring all of that out, especially with the buildings, because these are nicely exposed and the colours look nice. So I will, let's bring this mic down if I can. Like that, and then let's have a look at that. So, you can obviously see that, you know, it doesn't really look right because the bottom half is more exposed than the top half. And that's perfectly fine, because what we can now go and do is a few more things. We can adjust this layer here, so we can brighten it up a little bit here. Because we've got that raw data there, we actually have, well, we have that data here to expose for. Let's have a look at that now. So that to me does look a little bit better. But it still looks very, very fake. So what we're going to do is we're going to export this to our library, so to the camera roll. I will time-lapse this bit. Oh, no, I don't need to. It was done a lot quicker than I thought it would be. Now we're going to go to that, and let's check that. Yep, there it is. So here is the image, as you can see. Not looking too bad. Now, it does, as I said, it does work a lot better if you've got faster moving water. Because this water wasn't really moving that fast. So, it hasn't really worked that well. But it's working okay. So we can now go into Photoshop Fix. Now, I'm not a big fan of Photoshop Fix, but it will have to do. Recent, that was my air freshener going off. I do apologise for that. And it's this top one at the left. So now what we have here is we can go in and we can do a little bit more any light corrections. But first of all, what I want to do is I want to smooth out the water a little bit more, kind of defocus it to an extent, you could say, I suppose. We try and get to them corners. Whoops. This kind of thing on the iPad here is a lot easier if, you know, you have the Apple Pencil, because you can get into better details with it, whereas I can't. So it's having to do with my hands right now. There we go. So now that we've smoothened that out, what we can do is we can go and darken this as well. Let's have a look at that. Yeah, that's perfectly fine. Because this is still just too bright for my liking. Let's give it another coat. I suppose you could call it another coat. Bring it down more. So to me, that the sky still actually looks quite dark, so it's just okay on that. And then what we can do is we can go to adjustments. Sorry, I'm still learning. I don't really use this one that much. So there's the exposure. So this is the whole image. So let's add in some contrast. Let's have a look at the saturation. Whoops. Oh no, we'll keep that there. Let's lift some of the shadows. Sort out them highlights. Now Photoshop Mix and Photoshop Fix aren't really good editing photos for landscapes. The best editing app for me as a photographer for landscapes is, well, Lightroom. But what kind of file sizes are we dealing with? So we have 5000 by 3000 pixels, which isn't too bad. Let's actually see if we can defocus this to see if that does anything more. Doesn't really do much, really, does it? I will cover it in this just to give it that little bit extra. Now this is truly really optional. You don't have to do this. This is just something that I'm kind of experimenting with right now, and I quite like it, to be honest. I quite like it. It does defocus the, you know, the water and make it look like as if the exposure is that little bit longer when it, well, it really isn't. And I'm actually pretty impressed with that because it's actually pretty good. Anyway, guys, thanks for joining me in this video, and I will see you in the next one.